Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Leadership Lounge with Marlowe Foster. Joining us again today is Will Moore. Will Moore is Executive Director of the Eleanor Crook Foundation, which focuses on global malnutrition and global hunger. Today we pick up with the topic of philanthropic giving and its importance to a nonprofit organization. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to kick back on the Leadership Lounge with Marlowe Foster.
Philanthropic giving is critical, and only the best people, you have to be a person with means, but only the best people with means do it. But I think we also, we got to ask, why do we give? And on some level, it's to assuage guilt about, the inequality in the world and the fact that where all of us living in a developed society ended up, we basically won the lottery, and we give to make ourselves feel better about that. For some people, it has to do with their metaphysical outlook. It's about getting into heaven. For some people, it's much more self-centered. It's about receiving recognition, or in a lighter way, it's about sort of crafting an image of oneself for oneself and for those around one. At the very least, we give to feel good about ourselves, to feel like we're having an impact in the world. And again, those none of those drives are selfless. They lead to a good outcome, but they're not selfless drives. And I'm sorry.
No, I have a dear friend who does work with nonprofits, and one of the things he tries to educate nonprofits on is that you need the financial resources to accomplish your mission. But your job, especially as an executive director, is to understand the donor. It's not to necessarily focus on the mission. That is, quite frankly, secondary in this organization's view. It's to focus on the donor and her desires or his desires, because if you focus on the donor, if you meet those desires, you will have more money that you know what to do with for your nonprofit. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that kind of personal self-interest in terms of giving, of contributing, because I think that's absolutely true. I mean, people do it, a lot of people do it for the right reasons, but people also do it for very personally selfish reasons. And I think as EDs or presidents of organizations, we have to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, the money comes in that allows you to achieve your mission as an organization. And that's what the most important thing is.
Absolutely. If at its best, I think that worldview and that acknowledgement of what really drives people, it allows for a really effective form of pragmatism when you're in a leadership position, as you just said. I will say, the downside of that skepticism about even the notion of selflessness and that mistrust that I think does classify our generation to an extent. I do see that oftentimes it can lead to cynicism and even to paralysis in people in my generation. And that might be mistaken. That paralysis and that cynicism might be mistaken for simple selfishness. I think it's more complex than that. But regardless, I think it's equally as concerning as selfishness in a lot of respects.
So you have all this stuff going on in the world, and you're trying to tackle these tough issues around malnutrition, hunger broadly. How do you keep the foundation focused? How do you assess if you're being successful or not? I mean, there's so much going on. It must be a struggle for you.
It is a struggle to stay focused. The needs are so great and so myriad. It's hard to focus in, and once you do identify a focus, it's hard some days to stick with it. I mean, to maintain that confidence that the focus you've chosen is going to maximize the impact of your limited resources. And we're currently at the Eleanor Crook Foundation. We're currently undergoing our first long-range planning process. And that's been a really painful process in a lot of ways, more painful than I expected, to be quite honest. And it's led to some phasing out of some positions at the foundation, of some staff positions at the foundation, and it's led us to the slow phasing out of even portfolios and some investments that we've developed in recent years that are doing really important things. But, we decided early on in this process that what we needed to be doing broadly was focusing in and building greater alignment across our investments. So that's necessitated some of these difficult decisions. And I think the other thing that we struggle with, Marlowe, is that tension between being focused and being flexible. Mm-hmm. Because we believe at our foundation that really the unique advantage that philanthropy more broadly has to offer is that flexibility. We can be much more nimble than government donors, than major donors, and that provides real immense value to the nonprofit space. It allows organizations to innovate. It allows them to be responsive. So while we've decided we want to be more focused at the Eleanor Crook Foundation, we don't want to lose our flexibility and sort of our unique advantage as a philanthropy from that perspective.
So I'm sorry. So okay. So thinking about that at the Eleanor Crook Foundation, partner organizations, working with government, and then looking at trying to achieve the ultimate goals of the foundation. Are you playing well together as a group of philanthropic organizations? Are you partnering to work with government? I mean, how is it, from that team approach, everybody involved in this body of work? How are you doing there?
Yeah, no, is the short answer. We're not playing well together. We are all over the place. I mean, within this broad anti-hunger community, you've got the food security community not playing well with the ag community, not playing well with the nutrition community. Nobody's coordinated. Nobody's very well aligned. Nobody really has any idea what anybody else is doing. And I think that is primarily the fault of funders, because as a whole, funders, both government funders and philanthropic funders, but especially philanthropic funders, we're not focused. I mean, we are family foundations, and this is what drives the Eleanor Crook Foundation to really want to break the mold here, because the last thing I want to do is be like 9 out of 10 family foundations out there,
right? Where
they just do whatever they want, and it might be one thing today, and you can be sure it's going to be another thing tomorrow, completely different, and that leads to total chaos on the implementer side. I mean, if funders are not staying focused, then it is impossible for implementers to be focused because they have to follow the funding. So I think that, I blame our community as funders predominantly for that lack of alignment and collaboration. But I also think that, we have a unique role that we can play now as the funder community in fostering that new alignment. And that's one of the things we've become really focused on at the Eleanor Crook Foundation. I mean, we're working to create communities of grantees, to create moments for grantees to come together, to learn from one another, to plan innovative new collaborations. We're taking measures in the context of our grant making systems to try and mitigate competition, to try and mitigate the sense that every organization is fighting against with every other organization for our funding.
Right.
We're working to align with other funders. I spend a lot of my time, and my team spends a lot of our time just calling other funders. Calling the Gates Foundation, calling the Child Investment Fund Foundation, calling USAID and UK Aid, and just saying, what are you doing?
Right.
What are your priorities? What are you investing in? Oh, you're investing in egg supply chains in Ethiopia.
Right.
Well, we've been considering proposals for egg supply chains in Ethiopia, And actually, we just heard that 3 other foundations are doing the same thing. So good thing that we had this call. Maybe we should work together so that we can actually make sure that we don't have 10 different organizations doing the exact same thing in an uncoordinated way. But that is, typically that is how things end up. It does end up with 10 different organizations doing the exact same thing in an uncoordinated way. And the last thing that we're doing on that front is we're really building collaboration into our metrics at the Eleanor Crook Foundation. We're now with our reporting, we have qualitative and quantitative metrics focused on collaboration. Just asking grantees, what did you do over the last quarter to collaborate with other actors? How many events, from a numerical standpoint, did you have? How many meetings did you have in partnership with at least one other advocacy organization in the last quarter? And I think that itself has a profound effect, because in our space, what gets measured gets done.
And on an issue so large, this is a massive issue area. How do you assess whether what you're doing on a daily basis, is effective? How do you know that you're changing lives?
Yeah. That is a tough question, and certainly one of those questions that often keeps me up at night. That's sort of in the midnight rotisserie.
Right.
But I think it's one of the best things about being hyper focused as a foundation. We've decided at the Eleanor Crook Foundation, we're just doing 2 things. We're doing advocacy focused on financing and greater efficiency, predominantly for U.S. government nutrition programs. That's half of what we do. And the other half of what we do is really rigorous implementation research, on the ground research, just in East Africa, trying to test out the most innovative ideas on how to make existing nutrition programming even more cost effective, to make each dollar go further.
Okay.
And if it's not one of those 2 things, then we're not doing it. And that allows us to some extent to know if we're being effective, because if we have a win, if we see progress on either one of those fairly narrow fronts, we can be somewhat confident in saying that, we had a role in that success, or depending on the success, we can sometimes be confident that it was mostly due to us. But I think it also gets back to this idea of metrics, monitoring and evaluation from a grant making standpoint. It's really the only tool that we have to know if we're making a difference. Business, in that way, people in business have it real easy. You know if what you're doing is working based upon the impact on the bottom line.
That's right.
You try something, did it make money?
That's right.
That's what tells you if you're successful or not. But philanthropy, we don't have that. Philanthropists aren't used to thinking about return on investment in any way. For most philanthropists aren't. But even if we are thinking about return on investment, which is certainly what we think about at the Eleanor Crook Foundation, how do you measure that return? And it really comes down to having, oftentimes if it's an implementation project, if it's a project on the ground in East Africa, it comes down to having really rigorous third-party evaluators who are going in before a project and saying, on a population level in this area where this grant's going to be operating, here are the conditions going into it. 40% of kids are stunted, 15% of kids are acutely malnourished, only 10% of moms are exclusively breastfeeding, et cetera, to collect those indicators on the front end. And then when that project ends 3 or 4 years later, you send in the same evaluators, and through the exact same methodology, they take the same measurements, and you look at what happened over that period of time. And that's really all we have. But the last thing I'll say on that front, the last thing that makes this front so difficult is we can do that. We can do that monitoring and evaluation in a fairly straightforward way with a research or an implementation project in the exact way I said. You just basically go out and say, are kids healthier at the end of this project? And how much healthier, and how much did it cost to make each kid healthier? But it's a lot harder to do that with advocacy. And I think that's one of the reasons that most funders shy away from advocacy, because it's just really, even if you have a win, it's really hard to attribute that win to your investments,
Right.
to your efforts, because
Right.
you're always working in a broader ecosystem. And we do our best on that front. There are some ways to try and get at, what led to a policy change or a legislative change. We do, coming out of this recent increase in global nutrition funding from the U.S. government, we've got some of our partners currently just conducting exit interviews with staffers on congressional offices, with folks within the administration, folks on the appropriation committee, just asking, how did this change come about? What led to this change? And again, it's not perfect, but we do the best we can.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I liken it like to a private sector trade association where you get a piece of legislation passed or you get something tucked in an appropriation bill, and then company X, Y, or Z wants to say, well, it was because of my work. No, it was about the work of the collective trade association. Everybody coming to bear and helping to make that change. So that's a great example. All right, so you're taking all this stuff, but you're also the ED of the foundation, and so one of the things, or quite frankly, the thing we're focused on at the Leadership Lounge is leadership, but it's leadership from people who actually are focused on getting something done. It's just not having the title of ED or president or CEO. It's delivering on things. Clearly you're delivering. How do you think about yourself as a leader? Because it's not only you giving the speech in New York City, but it's you leading the staff meeting. It's you thinking about strategic planning. I mean, how do you rate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about how do I know if I'm a good leader or not a good leader, I guess all I can say is that I am continuing to learn every day. Mm-hmm. And when I look back on some of the decisions that I made 2 years ago, with the power of hindsight, I can say, what on earth was I thinking? And I hope I'll never do that one again. What did I learn from that? And I imagine I'll look back on where we are now and decisions I make this year in a few years and say probably would have done that a little bit differently if I had it to do over again. So I think that's part of being a good leader, is just continuing to acknowledge what's going well, and more importantly what's not going well, and reflect on how you can do things differently. I've also learned that, as you said, being a leader of a growing organization, and in many ways your metric of success is not how many speeches you make or how many articles you publish. To me it's about delegation. It's how many speeches did I not make?
Right. That's right.
How many important things happened that actually I didn't have to make happen, that we had really good people either on staff or that we invested in through our grants that did it without me having to get too involved. So that's really that's when I'm feeling good about myself as a leader, when things happen that I didn't even ask for them to happen, or I just asked one time, and then they happen because we have really smart people that are doing the day-to-day work.
So you're walking down the street, as we think about kind of closing out this interview, and you meet the starry-eyed teen. And the starry-eyed teen says, I want to run a foundation when I get older. I want to be like you, Will. I want to work on malnutrition issues or hunger issues or, domestic violence issue or whatever it is. When you think about your career up to this point and all that you've achieved, what is the little nugget, the kernel that you would share with that person as they prepare to become a leader?
Well, Marlowe, if somebody came up to me on the street and said that they wanted to be like me, I'd probably my first piece of advice would be for them to go get their head checked. But fortunately, I really don't think there is anyone out there on the streets today that would say that.
Aspires to be Will more.
But I guess, if we're talking about advice that I have to offer at this point in my career, I would probably just pass along some pieces of advice that have been given to me by my mentors and role models that I've found especially useful. The first piece of advice that I think has really helped me to make bold decisions and keep moving forward, in the first decade of my career, is to be wary of the snare of preparation, which is a term that Jane Addams, who was the feminist activist in Chicago who founded Hull House. She wrote a lot about this. That it's easy to spend, especially as a young person, it's easy to spend a decade working yourself up to something and just saying, I just need to get that one more degree. I just need to read that one other study, that one other book, and then I'll know what to do. And then I'm actually going to, take some action. But, we have problems that need solving now. And I think more than somebody who's read every study on an issue or, gotten every advanced degree there is to get, the world needs more get things done people. It needs people that aren't afraid to say, there's a lot I don't know, but I know that this problem is out there. That's clear. And I'm going to start doing something now to really tackle it in a proactive way. And I'm going to learn more about, the various potential solutions as I do that. But I'm not going to wait 10 years to take the first step. So beware of that snare of preparation is one that I think about often. The second piece of advice that I found to be really helpful is, before you make any decision of consequence, any sort of mid-sized decision or larger, always ask multiple people who know more about that issue than you do. And those people always exist. Again, in my mind, it doesn't matter if you've got every advanced degree and read every study. There's still multiple people out there that know more about that issue and that problem than you do. So make sure that you take the time to reach out to those people. Make sure that you surround yourself with those people as a leader, and figure out how you can keep them answering your phone calls.
Well, it has really been a pleasure getting to know you today, hearing about the work at the Eleanor Crook Foundation, and just your thoughts on leadership generally and how you approach your work. And I think our listeners will take a lot away from this interview. So I would love to offer to have you back, later this year or maybe early next year, just to talk about, what you've done over the course of the past year and kind of where you see yourself headed in the future. But again, Will, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Well, I would really look forward to the opportunity, Marlowe. Thank you so much for having me, and it's been a lot of fun.